This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, jerks?
Manning retired.
Which one?
Both.
I like kickers.
Put him on the board. Hausch Mazzoli. Got it. Championship.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 1 edition of the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, brought to you by the Fan Up Network. I am your host, guiding you through, Jason Jarvi. Follow me on Twitter at Jarvi the King. If you have any fantasy questions throughout the week, send them my way. I'll get back to you. It might take a half hour or so, but I will make sure to reply to every single one of your questions. Now, Game 1 is already in the books. Thursday Night Football, it was a rematch of the Super Bowl. The Carolina Panthers against the Denver Broncos. It definitely lived up to its potential. The Panthers came out, they were looking hot, but then they just kind of got shut down in the second half. And there were really, Cam Newton was the biggest story going into the game of how he was going to be. Was he going to be a bust going into against Denver again? But he really wasn't the focus point of the game today. There were really two high points of the game yesterday, and that was Denver Broncos C.J. Anderson and Carolina Panthers Kelvin Benjamin. C.J. Anderson coming off of a down year, and people expected a lot out of him, and he just didn't perform. He couldn't win the job over Ronnie Hillman, and last night he looked like the stud that he was at the end of his rookie season. He finished with 92 rushing yards, 47 receiving yards, and a pair of touchdowns, which that is really good news for C.J. Anderson owners. If he can keep up this pace, he could legitimately threaten to be the top back in this league. So that it is only week 1, but keep that in mind. And then Kelvin Benjamin, that was also the next biggest question. Is we didn't really see him too much in preseason. And he's coming off of that ACL injury that ended his year last year. And right away in the game, you saw he took a big hit and he popped right back up. He took another hit to the back of the knee, which was a little scary. But he finished the day, 6 catches, 91 yards, and a touchdown. It's not the biggest statistical day, but going up against a really good Denver Broncos defense, that's something that you can ask for. That's the best that you can hope for going up against Denver. Cam Newton he played Cam. He wasn't his MVP self of last season, but he gave you an average Cam day. Finished with just under 200 yards, a touchdown and a pick, and then also contributed 50 yards rushing and a touchdown. So that's the probably the minimum, the average that you want to expect from Cam Newton. The other players to look at, Jonathan Stewart, he didn't do a whole lot. He did look impressive. I think they were just it was a defensive battle, so there wasn't enough carries for him to really rack up those fantasy points. Greg Olsen, he did what Greg Olsen does. Devin Funchess, who everyone was saying was going to really outshine Kelvin Benjamin this year, was a non-factor. 4 targets, only 1 catch, and didn't do a whole lot. On the Denver receiving side, it was Emmanuel Sanders, Demaryius Thomas, C.J. Anderson, and Virgil Green. They all had around the same amount of catches. And then Sanders and Thomas both ended up with just under 50 yards. I was thinking that Demaryius Thomas was going to be the guy who got the majority of those targets, but he looked to be hobbled a little bit by an injury. But I think going throughout the season, Trevor Siemian, they're essentially a rookie quarterback who he never taken he never thrown a pass in the NFL until last night. He looked pretty decent. He made some rookie mistakes. He threw 2 interceptions, but he did have a nice touchdown pass. He He looked like he showed accuracy that you don't normally see out of a rookie quarterback. It'll be interesting to watch him throughout the season and what he can do. I still don't see him as a starter, and I would still leave him on waiver wires. Until he can string together a couple of games and show that he can make big passes, then Trevor Siemian he's still leave him on your waiver wire. I'm not ready to put him on my bench to be my backup. My sleeper that I told you for Thursday Night Football, Devontae Booker. First carry in the NFL, he drops it on the ground, and that fumble turns into points for Carolina. So it definitely wasn't a good start. Gary Kubiak showed a lot of faith in him, going back to him the next drive that they were out there. I'm not off of the horse of Devontae Booker yet. I think he's going to have some value this season. But definitely if CJ Anderson plays the way he did the rest of the season, it's going to turn into a one running back system. So I brought up those two high points of CJ Anderson and Kelvin Benjamin, and you really should have had those guys in your lineup. I have to point out, though, there are two people I know who benched these players. One being our very own John the Doc Macaroon. He texted me earlier in the night asking me about, what should I do? Should I do Stephon Diggs? He had Stephon Diggs at flex, and he had a couple people that he might be able to switch out. And I suggested John Brown of the Arizona Cardinals might be a better play than Diggs. So we start the game, and then after Kelvin Benjamin gets his touchdown, he texts me saying that, oh man, I put Benjamin on my bench. And I'm like, I didn't tell you to do that. And he benched Kelvin Benjamin for Stephon Diggs and John Brown. I gotta call you out for that, dude. Kelvin Benjamin is a guy who, unless you have studs in front of you, you gotta play him. He's a number one wide receiver. He's gonna be a fantasy at worst. He's a wide receiver too. So I gotta call you out, Doc, for that one. And then in my main league, in the Slackjaw League, Tommy, dude, what are you doing? You drafted CJ Anderson to be one of your starting running backs. And who does he put in? At running back, there's two positions that he could have put CJ Anderson in. One was this running back who he favored Darren Sproles, which I don't understand. And at flex, he puts Michael Floyd. What is it about Arizona wide receivers that people are kind of going crazy right now? Maybe there's something that I don't know. Maybe Darren Sproles goes off and goes berserky. But that just was not a smart move. Tommy, get your head out of your butt and start playing some fantasy football. Stop looking at your computer. Stop following what Whopper tells you to do. And play the guy who you know is going to be your stud. I know I'm giving him a hard time, but this is only week one. They got to get their stuff together. So that wraps up Thursday Night Football. It's time to start looking towards Sunday. It's all the games that everybody has been waiting for. It was you were probably excited if you had somebody on Carolina and Denver, but for all those people who didn't have anybody playing, it's definitely you just get more and more excited. So I'm gonna go through the games. I'm gonna break down the matchups that you should be looking at. And then at the end of the episode, I told you last week I'm done with King's Decree. And I think one King's Decree may even be coming true because Demaryius Thomas was a little hobbled last night. So we'll monitor that. But I'm going to start my start and sit segment, and I'll get to that at the end of the show. But let's start breaking down these games. First, we'll start with the 1 o'clock games. Green Bay at Jacksonville. I think this is going to be Aaron Rodgers. He wants to get the bad taste out of his mouth from last season. And he has Jordy Nelson back. He has a slimmer Eddie Lacy. I think this could be an ugly matchup for the Green Bay Packers. And I say ugly, meaning that Jacksonville, their crowd is going to be cleared out by the third quarter because they're going to be up so big. And the way Green Bay is built, it's going to be tough for Jacksonville to really stop them. Aaron Rodgers, he's going to have a good day. He's going to be one of the top quarterbacks in fantasy. Then you move on to the running back, Eddie Lacy. if they do get up big, they're going to start giving the ball to Eddie Lacy. And James Starks may even have a little bit of value here because if they do get up so big, then they probably want to conserve Eddie Lacy. So James Starks, only if you don't have he's a flex start at best. If you have a question mark, maybe in bigger leagues, James Starks would be a better play here. But I'm probably not going to start him unless I really, really have to. Jordy Nelson is a must start. He's probably going to have a big week, and I think Randall Cobb probably also. It'll be split, but Jordy Nelson probably gets the bigger haul. And Jordy Nelson has a better chance of getting the touchdown as opposed to Randall Cobb. And then going over to the Jacksonville side, the one thing you will have going for you is I think Green Bay will be up, so Jacksonville is going to have to throw the ball and get into this game. So that's really good news for Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns owners because they'll be the beneficiaries of that. Blake Bortles, I'm not sure if I want to start him this week. It's a close call. It's not the worst matchup of all, but you may see him throw a couple interceptions. I think the Green Bay Packers are going to try and get after him, so I would probably leave him on my bench this week. But Allen Hurns, Allen Robinson is a must start. He is the number one guy there, and I think Allen Hurns, depending on where you drafted him, if you drafted him as your second wide receiver, then he definitely has that value. But I feel more comfortable with Hurns in a flex role, and that's really where he should be the majority of the year, unless there's some sort of injury to Allen Robinson. Allen Hurns is going to be a really good flex play for the majority of the season. The running backs for Jacksonville, I'm not so sure on. With Chris Ivory and TJ Yeldon, it's really going to be a split. And if they are down in this game, the Jaguars, they're probably going to be passing more. So I think you see a little bit more TJ Yeldon. So TJ Yeldon, he might be a sneaky PPR play because of all the chances that he's going to get out of the backfield, and if they're going to have to be getting in this game. If somehow Jacksonville does get up on the Packers, then I would fully expect them to try and run this game out, and that would really help Chris Ivory. Both of these guys, I don't trust them to be one of my running back 1 or 2. If I had to pick one of them, I would pick Yeldon to be my flex play, just because I don't think they're not going to be in this game, so they're going to have to throw the ball. So for Green Bay, Rodgers, Lacy, Cobb, Nelson, all good plays. James Starks, even I think he's a sleeper play. On Jacksonville, I think Allen Hurns, Allen Robinson, both going to be solid. The rest of the Jaguars, I would definitely be careful with. Going to the next game, Buffalo at Baltimore. And this will be an interesting matchup. Tyrod Taylor for Buffalo. I think this will be an okay matchup, but he's likely more of a backup quarterback at this point in the season until he really breaks out, or if you have an injury on your team, he should really just be a backup. LaShawn McCoy, definitely going to be a starter. I think he'll have a decent game this week. I think right now he's in the top 10. He's right around there, maybe outside, according to some experts. But it'll be a pretty decent game for him. Anybody behind him, I wouldn't really start. Sammy Watkins, you start him. You drafted him to be either your number 1 or number 2 wide receiver, and it's it's not a really good matchup, but it's not a bad matchup. So Watkins, definitely a start. Going over to Baltimore, I don't really trust really any of these guys. Joe Flacco is probably I think they're gonna have a tough time. The Bills' defense is pretty solid, and with Rex Ryan there, they build great defenses. So Flacco, it'll be his first real game back since his injury last year. I think he'll struggle, and he probably, on a lot of leagues, he's on waiver wires. For the running back situation in Baltimore, it's all messed up. They released and then re-signed Justin Forsett, and it looks like Forsett is going to be still the starter, but I would use the term starter loosely because I think it's going to be just a mix of whoever is doing the best. So it's going to be a mix between Justin Forsett and Terrence West and even Javorius Allen. So I don't want to start any of those guys because it'll be a cluster this week. And at wide receiver, unless Flacco's going to do good, the wide receivers aren't going to do good. If I had to pick one wide receiver, and it would only be on a flex play, it would be Kamar Aiken, just because of that boom or bust type player, and he could finish the day with 3 catches and then have one really long touchdown reception. I think that's the best you can hope for from Kamar Aiken, and I don't really see a whole lot happening with Steve Smith or Brashad Perriman. I'm not even sure if Brashad Perriman, how much they're going to play. They'll probably ease him into this season. So for Buffalo, the only 2 starters I would really see would be LaShawn McCoy and Sammy Watkins, and maybe Charles Clay, the tight end. But depending on who you have, I would play it by ear. And then I'm not starting anybody for Baltimore. Moving on to Chicago at Houston, you're looking at Jay Cutler, and he's a guy who throughout the preseason, all the experts were praising him for some reason and saying that he's going to be this great quarterback now. And as a guy who I live in Detroit, and I see the Bears a lot because either the Detroit Lions are playing them or I just see them on Fox. They're one of the 1:00 games. So Jay Cutler does not impress me. I don't think he has the mental capacity to really become that superstar quarterback. He's going to put up some yards. He's similar to Matthew Stafford, where they have the arm talent, but they haven't shown that they can take it to that next level. So Jay Cutler, I think he's probably either on the bench or on the waiver wire in most leagues. Jeremy Langford, I think, is he won out the job this year throughout preseason, and he's going to get the majority of the carries in the game this week. It is going to be a tough matchup, though, against Houston. So you probably drafted him to be one of your starting running backs. But if you maybe have a better matchup, this might be an instance where you might bench Jeremy Langford. You probably don't have a better option, but maybe if you draft the one instance that really sticks out would be if you were one of those guys who stole D'Angelo Williams late. And even in that scenario, you're probably going to start D'Angelo Williams and Jeremy Langford in the running back and flex positions. But D'Angelo Williams would be a really good fit to take the position of Jeremy Langford if you had that situation on your team. But Jeremy Langford likely going to be a start, and he's gonna give you pretty decent production. But it'll be a running back too, and it'll definitely be hampered going up against Houston's D. The wide receivers, Alshon Jeffrey, I think he's a safe play, and he's going to have struggles going with, he goes with Jay Cutler. So Alshon Jeffrey, and the interesting thing in this game will be to see how Kevin White does in his first game. They drafted him last year, and he missed all of the season with an injury. So he was really brought in to be the replacement for Brandon Marshall. And if he does perform the way the Bears hope that he does, he really could be the replacement for Alshon Jeffrey as well. He could be the starting wide receiver next year. And then their tight end, Zach Miller, I think he's a low tight end play. I think he's more of a sleeper tight end until he really emerges as a really good tight end option for fantasy. You should probably keep him on your bench. But if you have no other better option, then maybe you drafted Tyler Eifert and then you drafted Zach Miller. Zach Miller, he's a sleeper play for sure, but he's probably I'd keep him on the bench for this week going up against Houston. On the other side of the ball, it's Brock Osweiler at quarterback. It's going to be his first game with a new team, and there's a lot of hope for him. But I just don't. It's a lot of unknown of what he's going to do yet, and in most leagues he's probably on the waiver wire. So I don't like him. I wouldn't start him this week. Lamar Miller is a really good play. I think he's probably going to produce somewhere in the top 5 of running backs this week. So you definitely have to start him along with DeAndre Hopkins. And he's a dude who he really emerged last year as being in that upper echelon with Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham. And regardless of how Brock Osweiler plays, he's still going to get the ball to DeAndre Hopkins, and he's going to make something happen. So, on the Bears side, Jeremy Langford and Alshon Jeffrey are your 2 keys that I would start. Kevin White, I'd probably leave him on your bench at this point. And then going over to Houston, Lamar Miller, definitely a start. Going to be a pretty good week for him, and DeAndre Hopkins, and I would leave everybody else alone. Going on to Cleveland at Philadelphia, this is going to be this is not a good matchup. These are 2 teams who are fantasy garbage at the moment, really, until they prove otherwise. RG3 going to be on the bench this week. Any of I take that back. For Duke Johnson, this might be an interesting play in PPR leagues, but Isaiah Crowell, he's not really that great. And I think he's not gonna win you a game for fantasy. But Duke Johnson in PPR leagues, I might start him. I actually have him in one leagues where I'm starting Duke Johnson over Jeremy Hill because Jeremy Hill is going up against a tough Jets defense. So you go the way the matchup dictates, and that's how I would play that. Corey Coleman, Terrell Pryor, the wide receivers for the Browns. I wouldn't feel comfortable playing either of those guys because we're in week 1. You probably just drafted your team, and we don't know if our stud players are gonna either get hurt or have down years. So you're gonna roll with your studs this week. The one Brown player aside from Duke Johnson that I would feel comfortable starting would be tight end Gary Barnidge. Broke out last year, and he's still going to be a red zone threat. If the Browns can get into the red zone, then he's probably going to be one of the first guys that RG3 looks at. On the other side of the ball, Carson Wentz. It was last week it was just kind of a whirlwind. They traded away Sam Bradford, and they handed the reins to their rookie Carson Wentz, and who I thought was just going to be he was going to be holding the clipboard all year, and now they're thrusting him into the fire, which I'm not sure if that's the best idea, but they're gonna roll with it. Carson Wentz not startable. Ryan Matthews, I think he's a guy. He's going to be a sneaky play this week, going up against the Browns, and I think he could be the guy who performs the best for the Eagles this week. Darren Sproles, as I mentioned before, Tommy, who started Sproles over C.J. Anderson, I don't think he's going to produce enough to really make an impact, and his only value is in PPR leagues. Jordan Matthews, I think it's kind of a question mark. I think at best he's a flex play. I don't really feel comfortable starting him as my number 1 or 2 wide receiver, but I think he starts getting in the question when you're talking about your flex. So that would be the place where I would start him. And the rest of the team, I really wouldn't. I don't feel comfortable starting any. Maybe Zach Ertz. I think he's one of those tight ends who's he's in the group after the Gronkowskis and the Jordan Reeds and the Greg Olsons, but he's just going to give you normal tight end points, nothing special. One note about the Eagles, I saw that Josh Huff was listed as the starter opposite of Jordan Matthews, so if you're risky enough, or maybe he's more of a daily fantasy play, Josh Huff might get you something. You never know. But for Cleveland, Duke Johnson and Gary Barnidge, the 2 guys that I would feel comfortable starting this week. And then on the other side of the ball with Philadelphia, Ryan Matthews and Jordan Matthews and Zach Ertz. Those are the 3 guys that I feel comfortable starting for that game. Tampa Bay at Atlanta has some big name players on the Buccaneers side of the ball. Like I said, Jameis Winston, I think he's going to be a really good fantasy quarterback this year. He has all the intangibles. He has the weapons. And I think he's going to have a sneaky good week this week. You probably didn't draft him as your starter, but unless maybe you have Tom Brady, I would feel really comfortable starting Jameis Winston this week. Doug Martin, he's a guy who you drafted to be your number one running back. I think he'll have a pretty solid week. Going on to Mike Evans, a guy you drafted to be either your number 1 or 2 wide receiver. I think he's going to have a solid week. Vincent Jackson, I think that's when it starts to go down. Vincent Jackson, I'm not sure. He's getting older, and I'm not sure if this is the week for him to really break out. And if it is, then I would feel more comfortable leaving him on the bench and having him break out than start him and have me get me a big goose egg. So I'm leaving him on the bench this week. And then moving to the other side of the ball, Matt Ryan, people have been looking down on Matt Ryan a lot. Now, he's throwing to Julio Jones. He's got Julio Jones to throw to, and he has he has 2 really good running backs behind him. So he's down in the rankings, but I think Matt Ryan he's got a pretty good schedule these first 4 weeks. So really until he gets to Carolina. So Matt Ryan, also another quarterback who could have a sneaky good day. And I think he's one of the quarterbacks that you should have targeted if you went after Tom Brady because of his strength of schedule. And, just because he's thrown to one of the best wide receivers in the league, if not the best. Going to the running backs, Devontae Freeman, you drafted him as your number 1 running back, you're going to play him. And I fully believe Devontae Freeman will pick up where he left off last year. And Tevin Coleman, I think at some point in the season, he'll be a flex play because I think they're going to want to limit Devontae Freeman and keep him healthy and keep him for the entire year. So you're going to see more and more of Tevin Coleman. And I think he has probably more value in PPR because they'll bring him in on third downs. But I think this game, I'm not going to start him just yet. Julio Jones, there's not a whole lot you can say about that guy other than start him. And then after him, I don't really want anybody else on the Falcons. Mohamed Sanu, only if you're in desperate need are you putting him in your roster, and it's only likely as a flex. So Tampa Bay, Jameis Winston, I like, and I think he's right on the outside of the top 10 of guys who should be started this week. Doug Martin starting, Mike Evans starting, the rest of the Tampa Bay, leave him on your bench. For Atlanta, Matt Ryan, only if you need to start him over a guy like Tom Brady. Otherwise, I'll leave him on the bench and let him perform, and then I'll switch out when he starts doing good. Devontae Freeman, definitely start. Tevin Coleman, leave him on your bench. Julio Jones, obvious. Start the guy and nobody else for the Falcons. Minnesota at Tennessee, and Minnesota is a team who I think people expected to really make a jump this year, and that was all ground to a halt when Teddy Bridgewater tore his ACL and dislocated his knee. So they're going into this game, and I'm not sure who the quarterback is going to be, but regardless, whether it's Sean Hill or Sam Bradford, I don't want either of those guys even on my fantasy team because they're not going to do anything. They're not going to give me any production. AP is AP. He's all day. He's the focus point of that defense, and teams are going to know that, and they're going to try and stop him, and they're probably going to fail. So AP he's going to do what he does, and he's going to score you touchdowns. After that, Stephon Diggs, Laquan Treadwell, Charles Johnson, it's really tough to play any of those guys. And I get on the doc because he didn't take my advice in game 1. Diggs is probably the best option, just because he's the returning number 1 receiver. But it's gonna be tough sledding. They're gonna give the ball a lot to Adrian Peterson, and Laquan Treadwell, I don't think he's progressed enough to be any factor in fantasy. And the same with Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson was a guy who was drafted higher last year, but he fell off the face of the earth and did nothing. Kyle Rudolph also, I think he might be good for a couple catches and some yards, but you should not be starting him in leagues. Going on the other side of the ball with Tennessee, Mariota is a guy, I think he has backup potential, but you're not starting him this week. And then you look at the running back situation. DeMarco Murray, you probably drafted him as your third running back. So I think at best you're looking at him as being a flex play. And I think you could say that really for DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry, because at this point in the season, the first game, you're not sure who's going to get the bulk of the carries. I'm not even sure if the head coach knows who's really going to get those carries. So I don't feel comfortable starting them, but I'd be okay with putting them in as flex and just hoping for the best out of those guys. Their receiver situation, I don't like at all. Tajay Sharp is really the only guy you want to look at, and I'm not starting him this week. I'm going to wait until he starts producing and gets more rapport with Marcus Mariota, and then I'll put him in my lineup. And so really the only Titan who I'd feel 100% comfortable starting would be Delaney Walker, just because you know what he's going to do, and he's going to get you a couple catches, probably somewhere between 50 to 70 yards, and hopefully a touchdown. So Minnesota, AP, definitely start. Jerick McKinnon, maybe even in a PPR situation, but other than, I think AP really is the only guy that you 100% start. And Stephon Diggs, maybe in a flex situation. And on the other side of the ball, Mariota, you're sitting on the bench. All the wide receivers, you're sitting on the bench. Delaney Walker, you're starting him because you drafted him probably pretty high to be your tight end. And Derrick Henry, DeMarco Murray, I don't feel comfortable, but I'd be okay with them as flex plays. Going on to the Cincinnati at the New York Jets. It'll be an interesting game, and I think it'll be a tough one for the Bengals. Andy Dalton he's gonna have a tough time, and if Andy Dalton has a tough time, I think it trickles down to everybody with AJ Green and Tyler Boyd and whoever they have at tight end. So it's going to be a long day for Cincinnati going up against that Jets defense. Jeremy Hill and Gio Bernard, at best, I think both of those guys are flex plays this week. Jeremy Hill, you may have drafted to be your running back too, but because of this matchup, and I think they may be using Gio Bernard a little bit more this week as a pass catching threat out of the backfield. Jeremy Hill's going to have a tough time going up against that Jets defensive line. So both of those guys, I think, at best are flex plays. AJ Green, you probably draft him as your number one wide receiver, but I don't like his matchup this week. He's going to be on Revis Island, and I don't like the matchup, and I think it's going to be tough for him, and this could be one of those days where AJ Green just disappears from the face of the earth. Going on the other side of the ball, the New York Jets, Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think he signed the contract late, and it's going to take a little bit of time to get up to speed, but I think he's still going to have a decent game, but not good enough to be a fantasy starter. At the running back, Matt Forte, I think you drafted him as a starter and you're going to play him as a starter. He'll probably have a tough game, but probably in PPR formats, he has a little bit better day. The wide receivers, Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker, I give the edge to Marshall. I think he's deserves to be your number one or number two wide receiver. And then Eric Decker, I feel better having him as a flex play, but I would definitely still start him this week because you probably don't have any better options after him. And with Tyler Eifert hurt on the Bengals, he's really a non-factor until he gets healthy. So Bengals, I think you have to start AJ Green just because of how high you drafted him. I don't like his matchup though. And then on the Jets side of the ball, I think between Matt Forte, Brandon Marshall, Eric Decker. I think you have to start all three of those guys. The only question mark is Eric Decker there, when you'd have to have a better option to put him on your bench. Going to Oakland at New Orleans, this might be the interesting game, and if you're looking for a game with a bunch of fireworks, I think this is going to be that game, because you have Drew Brees, the veteran who slings the ball around, and you have Derek Carr, who's the new young gun, who's going to be tossing it all over the field. He's got Michael Crabtree and Amari Cooper. This could be a really high-scoring game, and I like the majority of the players on both teams this week. Derek Carr, I'm not sure if he's a starter just yet, but he was a really good option if you went out and drafted Tom Brady and you have your quarterback suspended, obviously. So Derek Carr he could be a sneaky good play this week. And then you got Latavius Murray. If either these teams it's going to be a shootout, so they're going to try and run. And Latavius Murray also adds that element out of the backfield, so he's going to be involved. Amari Cooper, I think he'll be good, and Michael Crabtree, I think maybe he's gonna get some play, but I think the focus will definitely go to Amari Cooper, and that New Orleans defense. It isn't really that much improved from last year, so Oakland players could have a big day. Conversely, though, I think New Orleans always had the possibility to break out. Drew Brees, he's a starter, obviously. You put him in the game. Mark Ingram, a guy who I think is going to have a pretty decent season. You're definitely starting him. For wide receiver, Brandon Cooks, you have to start him. And then after him, though, I think I like Kobe Fleener, and I think he could have a big game this week, and then he might cool down in weeks, going forward. He'll jack up his value after week one, but we'll have to wait and see. The other wide receivers beyond Brandon Cooks, though, I'm not huge on. Willie Snead maybe as a flex play, but I think it's too early to start Michael Thomas or any of those guys behind them. So really, all these players on these teams, I think, have the ability to start. Derek Carr, if you feel comfortable enough benching your starting quarterback for Carr, more power to you. Latavius Murray, definitely a starter. Amari Cooper, Crabtree, I think, is a flex play. And then on the other side of the ball, Breeze, Ingram, Cooks, Snead, and Kobe Fleener, all those guys are worthy of starting this week. And to finish up the 1 o'clock games, you have San Diego at Kansas City. And it's going to be a tough matchup for San Diego. You drafted Phillip Rivers to probably be your starting quarterback. But if you have somebody who has a better matchup, perhaps Derek Carr, you may want to start him over Phillip Rivers going into Arrowhead and playing Kansas City. Melvin Gordon, I think it's yet to be seen exactly what he's going to do, but you probably drafted him high, and you're still going to start him as your either running back 1 or running back 2, unless you're in an 8-team league and you just have massive amounts of studs running backs. You're starting Melvin Gordon this week. Danny Woodhead, I think he factors in as a PPR play. I don't really like him in standard leagues. And then Keenan Allen, I think he's going to pick up right where he left off after he got injured. No matter how bad Phillip Rivers does, he always loves him some tight ends. So Antonio Gates you should be starting him. And unless he comes out in the next couple days and ends up injured, you're starting Antonio Gates. On the other side of the ball, Alex Smith, he's not a starting quarterback. He's very, very dependable as a NFL quarterback, but fantasy players hate him just because he doesn't do a lot. It's going to be Jamal Charles and Spencer Ware is something you're going to have to watch right up until game day. And luckily, this is the 1 o'clock game, so you don't have to make a tough decision of do I start or do I bench Jamal Charles? And hopefully you have Spencer Ware on your team as the handcuff, because it's really leaning towards that even if Jamal Charles plays this week, that he's going to be limited, and Spencer Ware will get the majority of the carries this week. And even if Jamal Charles plays the majority of the game, I think if they get down to the goal line, they're going to give it to Spencer Ware because they're going to want to limit the possibilities of Jamal Charles getting hurt again. So be very careful if you are starting Jamal Charles this week. Spencer Ware, I think, is a very good sneaky play. Maybe if you picked him up in the middle of the draft, you don't even have Jamal Charles. He could be a pretty decent flex play this week. Beyond him, though, I think Jeremy Maclin is the only wide receiver that should be started right now for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then Travis Kelce is... he's one of the top 10 tight ends. He's going to give you some production. It's not going to be super great, but it'll be a tight end production. So for San Diego, Phillip Rivers, you probably have to start him. Melvin Gordon, probably have to start him. Keenan Allen is the one guy that I definitely feel comfortable playing this week. And then Antonio Gates, you're starting that tight end. On the Kansas City side, the one guy, actually the two guys that I only feel comfortable starting are Jeremy Maclin and Travis Kelce. Spencer Ware is a pretty decent flex play, and Jamal Charles is very scary for me this week because I'm not sure what he's going to do. So I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up the 4 o'clock games, Sunday Night Football, and then we'll go on to Monday night, and then I'll give you my starts and sits of the week, and then it'll be time for football. Are you excited? You're listening to the Fantasy Nerds on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. The Fantasy Nerd Show is sponsored by the Fan Up Network. They've developed the ultimate fantasy football app. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need. You can track teams and scores across multiple platforms, get latest injury and player news, and access to expert advice. See the hot trends with waiver pickups and drops. It has everything you need to manage all your fantasy football teams. Android users can get the app in the Play Store, and an iPhone version is now available in the App Store. Go to fanupnetwork.com to learn more and follow them on Twitter at fanupnetwork. Welcome back to the Fantasy Nerds, and we're wrapping up the rest of the NFL preview of Week 1. We're at the 4 o'clock games. You got Miami at Seattle. It'll be a tough matchup for Miami, and I think Seattle, they're going to, I think they're going to run over Miami. I'm just saying, it's a feeling. On Miami, Ryan Tannehill, not a starter. Arian Foster at running back, you drafted him probably as your number 3 running back. So I think at best, I'd feel comfortable having him as a flex play. If you had to put him in at running back 2, I'm not upset about that. But the best that I feel about Foster at the moment is a flex because I'm not sure how the Dolphins are actually going to use him. And then at wide receiver, I think it's kind of a mess with Devontae Parker and Kenny Stills. And you're just not sure who's going to get the majority of these players. Jarvis Landry, he's really the only one who you can trust on this team. I'm definitely going to start him as a wide receiver, but I don't want to start any of those other wide receivers just yet. The other side of the ball, though, I think you have plus signs for pretty much everybody. For Russell Wilson, I think he's going to have a really good game. He's going to pick up where he left off last year. I think he's going to be one of probably the top 3 quarterbacks this year, and I think he's going to threaten to be the top dog this year. The running back situation is a little murky. I would definitely monitor the situation of Thomas Rawls. If you have another option that you could start over Rawls, I might do that because even if he does play, he's going to be limited. And, with his backup, Christian Michael, I'm not super sold on him. And I guess I'd be okay with him as a flex play this week maybe, but I don't really want to have to start him. And then the rookie running back that I've been big on all year, CJ Prosise, I think It's not his time yet. I think throughout the season they're going to use him more. It's just not going to be week 1. And then Doug Baldwin going to have a good year, and he's going to start off big this week. And then I think Jermaine Kearse will definitely get in the mix a little bit. And then you're going to have to watch and see also, just like Thomas Rawls, if Jimmy Graham plays, if he's healthy. Even if he's not 100% and he still plays, I think you have to start him unless you have a better option that you can start over Jimmy Graham. So for Miami, Arian Foster and Jarvis Landry, really the only 2 guys that I want to start this week. And then on Seattle, Russell Wilson, Doug Baldwin, Jermaine Kearse maybe is a flex play, not so huge on him though. Thomas Rawls and Christian Michael. I think Rawls, you might have to start him just because he's the best option on your team. And then Christian Michael, best as a flex play. And then definitely watch the situation with Jimmy Graham. The next game, near and dear to my heart, the Detroit Lions going to Indianapolis to take on the Colts. I will actually be at this game to root on my Detroit Lions. And this could be an interesting game. I obviously hope the Lions demolish the Colts, but we're gonna have to see. The Colts definitely don't have a great defense, but you can never underestimate what Andrew Luck could do. So for the Lions, I think Matthew Stafford, it's a really good play for him. I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback this week. And just because of the matchup that he has, I think the running back situation, that is a little murky. I don't really feel comfortable starting Amir Abdullah, maybe Theo Riddick in PPR option, because I think they're going to probably pass the ball a lot. And Theo Riddick really came out last year as a really good PPR play. So I'm not starting Amir Abdullah unless I have to. But Theo Riddick, I definitely give a nod in PPR leagues as a flex. Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, I like both of those guys. I think they're gonna pass enough that both of those guys are gonna produce. If I had to give an edge to one guy this week, I think it might be Marvin Jones. From what we saw in the preseason, he has big play potential. But both of those guys are really good plays this week. And then, the tight end, it's really a big question mark. Eric Ebron, they're not sure if he's going to play. But if it's not Ebron, it's not worth starting any Detroit Lion tight end. On the opposite side of the ball, the Indianapolis Colts, you're going to want to monitor Andrew Luck's situation. They've been saying that he's been limited at practice. So you're probably going to have to start Andrew Luck this week because you drafted him as one of the top 5 quarterbacks in your league. So unless you really have a good backup quarterback who has a good matchup, you're probably starting Andrew Luck. And this could all just blow over. Andrew Luck could have a good game, but I wouldn't be surprised if he struggled in game 1. And like I said in one of my King's Decrees earlier in an episode, that I think Luck is going to struggle the first half of the season. It's going to take him until midway through to really pick up the offense again and get this team on the road. Frank Gore, you probably have to start him. I guess you don't have to start him, but I feel most comfortable starting him as a flex. I'm not sure. He's going to have a tough time running against the Lions, front 7, but you never know. You can't count out Frank Gore. For the receivers, Dante Moncrief, T.Y. Hilton, both will, I think I give the edge to Dante Moncrief because T.Y. Hilton is probably going to be going up against their top cornerback, Darius Slay. I think he might, give him 1 or 2 catches. And the best I think you're going to hope for is T.Y. Hilton gets a long touchdown because that's his forte. But Dante Moncrief I like as a better he's a better pass catcher. He's a better route runner. So Moncrief may have the better week this week. And then I'm not starting Philip Dorsett. And Dwayne Allen, not comfortable starting him as a tight end. So for the Lions, I think Matt Stafford and Marvin Jones and Golden Tate all are solid plays this week. with Theo Riddick being an interesting flex play in PPR leagues. And on the other side of the ball, Andrew Luck, you're probably going to have to start him unless you have a better option. Frank Gore, best as a flex play. And then T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief. I like both of those guys in this game. New York Giants at Dallas Cowboys, already an NFC matchup, week 1. I think it'll be a shootout. I think Eli Manning with Odell Beckham and Sterling Shepard, and maybe he has Victor Cruz. I think the Giants want to get back on track and get on their winning ways. So I think Eli Manning is a good play this week. I think Rashad Jennings might have a tough time going up against the Dallas defense. But Odell Beckham, you drafted him probably in the top 3 picks in drafts. So you're starting him, obviously. I like Sterling Shepard, but I don't like him enough to start him this week. So I'm leaving him on the bench. On the Dallas side of the ball, Dak Prescott is a very interesting prospect at quarterback, but I'm not ready to start him really in any leagues, unless it's maybe a 2-quarterback league. Dak Prescott should remain on your bench. But Ezekiel Elliott, the number 4 pick in the draft this year, you're definitely starting him. I think he'll have a good game. Des Bryant, you drafted him to be your number 1 wide receiver. You're definitely playing him this game. And I think even Jason Witten, I think he could be a safety valve for Dak Prescott. He's going to be running those underneath routes. So whenever coverage breaks down and Prescott is scrambling around, I think he's going to look for Jason Witten. So he might be a sneaky play as a tight end this week. So for the Giants, Eli Manning is a good play. Rashad Jennings and Odell Beckham, all good plays. And on the opposite side of the ball, you're going to be starting Ezekiel Elliott, Des Bryant, and Jason Witten. The rest of the players, I'll just leave on the bench. Going on to Sunday Night Football, you get the New England Patriots, not led by Tom Brady, but Jimmy Garoppolo, and against the Arizona Cardinals. So Jimmy Garoppolo, I didn't actually see him drafted in any of the leagues that I was in. So you're likely not going to be starting him. But the players around him might be okay. LeGarrette Blount, best as a flex play. James White has a little bit more value as a PPR play. In standard leagues, I wouldn't feel comfortable starting him. But maybe. Julian Edelman, it's not until Tom Brady gets back, it's going to be tough for all these wide receivers. Julian Edelman is probably the only wide receiver I would start for the Patriots, just because they have to throw it to somebody. But more than likely, they're really going to throw it to Rob Gronkowski. He's the guy that I feel most comfortable starting this week on the Patriots. You drafted him probably in the 1st or 2nd round, and you're going to have to start him whenever he's healthy. On the other side of the ball, the Arizona Cardinals. We talked with my brother that the Cardinals, it looks a lot like smoke and mirrors, but there's got to be some truth somewhere. I think the smoke comes with David Johnson. I don't trust him, and it might be an okay matchup for him this week, but I'm not a fan until he really starts going berserky week after week after week. I'm not going to trust David Johnson. But you drafted him probably in the 1st round, so you got to start the guy. And Carson Palmer, I think once again, I think he was underdrafted in most leagues. He went probably as the 15th or 16th quarterback, and he performed last year as a top 10 quarterback. So I still like Carson Palmer. I think they're going to throw the ball a bunch, and they had the receivers to do it. Between Michael Floyd, John Brown, and Larry Fitzgerald, they're all at some point banged up. I think Fitz is dealing with a quad injury, and John Brown is coming off the concussion protocol, and Michael Floyd might just be looking the wrong way at somebody, and he'll get injured. But I think for the Cardinals, they're all really decent plays. Carson Palmer, unless you have a better quarterback, I'd consider starting him this week. And then, David Johnson, you have to. And I feel comfortable with Larry Fitzgerald and John Brown. Michael Floyd, he just always gives me the heebie-jeebies that I'm never sure if he's going to play good because he just always seems to underperform. So for the Patriots, you're looking Rob Gronkowski and Julian Edelman are the only two guys that I really feel comfortable starting. LeGarrette Blount and James White, it's only if you have to, but I don't like them as flex plays. On the opposite side of the ball, Carson Palmer, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, and John. I almost said Michael Floyd. No, not Michael Floyd. John Brown. Those are the guys I feel comfortable starting for the Cardinals. I guess if you have to start Michael Floyd, the only way I feel comfortable starting him is as a flex, but hopefully you have a better option on your team. Moving on to Monday Night Football, you have the first game at 7:10. You get the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Washington Redskins. Pittsburgh, Ben Roethlisberger, you're going to start. D'Angelo Williams, a great start. He's going to have Le'Veon Bell out for the first 2 weeks. So if you are one of those guys who picked up D'Angelo Williams outside of drafting Le'Veon Bell, use him while you got him because you're really going to get the value for these first 3 weeks. And really, you should be starting to think about trading D'Angelo Williams at this point. Antonio Brown, he was the unanimous number 1 pick in pretty much every draft that I've seen. You're starting him. I'm not sure about anybody else behind him, though. Marcus Wheaton or the Eli Rogers, I don't feel super comfortable starting those guys yet until that number 2 wide receiver emerges. Antonio Brown is the number 1 option. He's the number 1, number 2, and the number 3 option for Big Ben. On the opposite side of the ball, Kirk Cousins, he's going to have a decent game. The Pittsburgh, if there's one downside of the Steelers, it's that their defense is not that good. They can put up a ton of points, but they cannot defend the ball. So I think Kirk Cousins could have a field day with this Steelers team. And if you have him on your roster for Monday Night Football, you're gonna be excited. So Kirk Cousins, I think he's definitely a good play. The running back situation is murky. Matt Jones, they're still unclear if he's going to play or not. And I think even if he does, they're going to be very careful because they're going to want to monitor that AC joint that he hurt and if he can take hits. So the guy behind him though, Robert Kelly, I don't trust him. I don't want to start him. So Chris Thompson maybe is a PPR play, but you probably have better options outside of Chris Thompson. And then at wide receiver, Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon, decent plays. If I give the nod to anybody, I'd probably give it to Pierre Garçon just because he is the more consistent pass catcher, where Deshaun Jackson is boom or bust. Maybe because it is Monday Night Football, you never know. Deshaun Jackson always seems to perform well on a big stage. But both of those are interesting plays, and I'd be okay playing those guys at flex. And then obviously Jordan Reed, who I think is going to be the best tight end this year if he can stay healthy. You're definitely starting that guy. So for Pittsburgh, Big Ben, D'Angelo Williams, Antonio Brown, you're definitely starting. On Washington, Kirk Cousins, I think you should be starting him unless you have a better option. Maybe you went Cam Newton in your first round and then picked up Kirk Cousins in the 8th. But I like him this week. And then Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, both as flex plays. And Jordan Reed, you're definitely starting at tight end. And then the game to finish out the week 1, the Los Angeles Rams at the San Francisco 49ers. Wow. I'm not sure if there's a worse matchup. I was looking, the Browns-Philadelphia game was pretty bad, but the Rams and 49ers is a horrible matchup. And Case Keenum currently is starting for the Rams, and he shouldn't have been drafted. He shouldn't even be listed on your waiver wire. He's that bad. So no to Case Keenum. Todd Gurley, though, definitely you're starting that guy because he is their plan A, B, C through Double Z. He's their one and only option and bright spot in Los Angeles until Jared Goff develops into a better quarterback. So Gurley, you're definitely starting. At wide receiver, Tavon Austin maybe as a flex play, just because they want to use him as a weapon. But anybody else on the Rams, I do not like. On San Francisco, also a bad quarterback situation. You got Blaine Gabbert as your starter. He's not going to be good. So I'm, again, another guy who shouldn't even be on your waiver wire. Carlos Hyde, you may have to start him depending on where you drafted him. He could be okay, but that Rams defense is really, really good. So it's going to be tough sledding for Carlos Hyde. And then Torrey Smith, probably the only, if you have to start any 49er wide receiver, you're going to go with Torrey Smith. But I don't feel good about starting him. And if I have to, it's going to be a flex play. So Los Angeles Rams, Todd Gurley, you're definitely starting. Tavon Austin, depending on the matchups, you're maybe a flex play. On San Francisco, Carlos Hyde, you probably have to start him. And then Torrey Smith, I think you just go with the matchups, and you probably have somebody on your roster who has a better matchup than Torrey Smith going up against the Rams. So that does it for the preview of Week 1 of the NFL. And we're just about at the end of this episode. But, I usually ended these shows with the King's Decree. But, I have a ton of those now. So I'm starting a new thing with the beginning of the season. I'm going to give you my starts and sits of the week. So I'm not here to tell you to start Russell Wilson and to sit Blaine Gabbert. I'm going to give you guys who I think are going to have good weeks. And for the sit side of this, you're probably not going to sit a lot of these guys, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Jeremy Langford has a bad matchup in Houston, or that Zach Zenner on the Detroit Lions isn't going to get any carries because he's the third running back on the team. I'm going to give you guys who I think have bad weeks, who have bad matchups, and aren't going to perform where they're ranked. So we'll start out with quarterback, Week 1. My start of the week, I like Derek Carr of Oakland going up against New Orleans. I said it in the breakdown that I think this is going to be a shootout of a game, and I like Derek Carr this week. Conversely, on the sit side for quarterbacks, I am sitting Andrew Luck. So he's going up against, I think it's an underrated Detroit defense. They have Ziggy Ansah coming off of a breakout year, and he's developing into one of the best pass rushers in the league. So that Colt offensive line is not any better from last year. So I think Andrew Luck is going to be running for his life on Sunday. So I have him as my sit this week. At running back, my start is Ryan Matthews going up against the Cleveland Browns. I think with Carson Wentz getting the start now, they're going to try and make this offense as easy as possible for him. And I think that's going to involve running Ryan Matthews as much as possible. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets upwards of 20 to 25 carries this week. And hopefully he gets some red zone carries and he gets into the end zone. On the other side, I told you I didn't like him. I've said it for weeks and weeks and weeks. My sit this week, David Johnson of the Arizona Cardinals going up against the New England Patriots. I think he's still going to perform well, but people have him. He was drafted in some leagues as the number 1 running back. So I think he's really going to underperform, and people are going to start to see maybe David Johnson. He's going to be the C.J. Anderson of this year. So he's my sit of this week. And then at wide receiver, it may be homerish, but I am going to pick Marvin Jones of the Lions going up against the Indianapolis Colts. I like his big play ability, and I think that Colts defense is not that good. So I think Marvin Jones could have a big day. It's going to really excite Lion fans, and hopefully it carries on through the rest of the season. But all us Lion fans have gotten our hopes dashed. usually weekly. So, but my sit of the week for wide receiver, I'm going with AJ Green. I said it. He's going in the preview. He's going to be on Revis Island all game, and I think he's going to have a tough time. I think Tyler Boyd could be the better option in Cincinnati this week because he'll be on the opposite side. But I just think AJ Green definitely doesn't have the week that he hopes he has to start off this brand new season. So that wraps up starts and sits, and that wraps up this episode of the Fantasy Nerds. I'll come back next week. We'll have another preview on Thursday. We'll break down the Thursday night game for week 2, and then we'll be back Friday. We'll break down another week of games, and I think I speak for everybody that I'm just so happy that football is back. I am Jason Jarvi, and until next week, later, nerds.